Hey, it's Chris. What are we talking about today? Cysmic. Big crate box right here. Everything you see in front of me and so much more. Relaunching on GameFound. What do you need to know? 2 to 6 players, 30 minutes per player. Amerithrash trash. Everything on the board. Escape the planet before it completely collapses on you. Be the first one to build your colony ship and do so in order to win. My thoughts. Pros, cons, who's it for, who isn't going to like this, everything else in between. Let's go. The question in this game, actually, of all things, is where to start. Because just to give you the briefest smattering of overview, without going into the rules, without going into the how to play style of things, there are some elements that you just need to know in order to then make sense of what the elements are that you may like and what the elements are that you may not be as big a fan of. Literally what you see in front of you is just a smattering of the setup. And that's, a debatable issue we'll touch on later about, do you like just, putting a bunch of stuff down on the board and taking 5 or 10 minutes at the beginning of the game to do so? Not a huge deal. But what you essentially have is you have a randomly set up hex-based grid situation here with different elements on the board that are going to be utilized in different capacities. Obviously, I didn't do a very good job setting this up here completely, but what we got going on is the basic gist of what you're going to be seeing in a game-by-game scenario. It's going to be completely full, but as you can also see, that my table isn't even big enough in this room to handle nary the main board game, let alone any of the individual player aspects. Because also, it's big. Everything about this game is big. It's go big or go home in a nutshell. The first comparison I'm just going to throw out there is this is the equivalent of Foundations of Rome with a sci-fi fantasy Amerithrash game in terms of scope, but in terms of just what they have going for them as well as what they are going for in terms of production. These are your rocket ship launch pads, essentially, and they are just massive. To put it in comparison, right, this is a regular miniature about the size of anything else you'd see in a game. This is how big the differential is right there. And so you can just see, for scale, they went for it. And you have your various types of harvesters and miniatures and combats and power mechs and all of those things that you're going to be utilizing on a turn-by-turn, round-by-round, slight area control-esque vibe in order to be the first one that launches this. That's all that frickin' matters, is you need all of the modules, blueprints, to launch it. There's a few caveats there we'll get into in a second. So the question that you have to say is, this is, as the comparison goes with the Foundations of Rome, do you need all of this deluxified overproduction? This is crowdfunding bloat, if you will, encapsulated. And I don't say that as a negative. I say that as this is where a lot of people's minds go when they want something with table presence, where they want the experience. And say what you will at this point, the hobby has seen the need for it based on people willing to pay for it. And so now we see this aspect of things. Whether you like it or not, it's there because people do want it overall. That aside, again, no judgment, but just a state of the fact. It's, you've got this sitting behind me. You've got this. You've got a lot of these other things that are a direct reflection of where consumers' priorities are. And this is a reflection of that, just in the same sense, nothing else. So what you've got going on here is you've got your individual player boards. If I actually held it up the correct way, you could see that you've got 5 different slots here, columns, if you will, that are all symmetric across the player boards. There's a lot of text here I won't bore you with, but essentially what happens on a turn-by-turn basis is you have 10 different command cards that you are going to be slowly allocating to these 5 slots. You say, well, Chris, that seems relatively straightforward. I understand that completely, Chris. Where's the nuance there? Where is the actual depth of gameplay? Well, the tricky part is that now you can see I have 10 different command cards though. And so on a turn-by-turn basis, you're going to be choosing one of these various command cards with their asymmetries, with their multi-action use, and you're going to be first off burning it. And then secondly, choosing the one you want, playing in that slot, and then choosing accordingly an action down here. And that is going to be how you're going to be managing things on a turn-by-turn basis. Burn one, play one, burn one, play one, burn one, play one, burn one, play one, end of round. a typical game going anywhere between maybe 8 to 15, depending on the player count. With this 2 to 6 player, again, strategically but highly tactically based game in a nutshell. And you're going to be slowly maneuvering your troops around. And the second point that I'm going to make in this game is that the troops are going to be the main crux of things. Because this is going to be heavy take that, but it's take that with a twist. Essentially what you've got going on here is you're going to be slowly having your troops attack the other players. It is direct player interaction. How it is done is slightly different, and this is where the nuance is going to potentially be slightly appealing to you, or if, again, that is not your aspect or dynamic of gaming in a whole, and the 4X-ish vibe, where this is a little heavier in that sense, this may not be for you as well. I mean, it's less explore too, but you know where I'm going with that in general. And what I mean by that is when you have a conflict, they are just now locked. The battle does not immediately resolve. You do not figure out who is the winner at that very moment. You wait, and you wait, and you wait until one of the two of you plays your battle card. And this battle card then determines who gets first strike. And then not only do you figure out that battle, but you figure out all of your battles simultaneously, one after another after another. I guess that's not really simultaneously. Sequentially, we'll go with, if you will. Wordsmith that I am. And therein lies the advantage, disadvantage. Do you pile those battles up? Do you wait for others to initiate? Do you wait for others to fall into your trap? Do you plan accordingly? Or do you have to just adapt in that sense? Because the battles themselves as well are driven by the almighty dice here. And these dice, again, come in a couple of different varieties of colors with a couple of different varieties of numbers along them, and you're rolling based on the troops that you have. And sometimes battles can just wipe someone else out with that first strike ability that you're never going to get a second chance. So the timing of that is very, very important. But again, the locking in aspect to not allow you to then reuse those in potentially the same round at all is going to be a dynamic that you may or may not enjoy. I say that now because then also the main reason you have to do the attacking is because you essentially have to trade in captured pieces, because units are not lost. Units are captured when they are defeated in battle, and you are going to be utilizing that to trade them back to the opponent that you took them from in order to get the blueprints of the parts of the ship that you need to build in the first place. And you can see some of this resource management that goes on the sideboard of these little pieces here in terms of I'm managing my resources in order to build and deploy, crystals being your main way of doing so. And then the modules on the left side, all of the pieces here that I need in order to build my ship in the first place. And so those are all symmetric between all of the players. And so there's no difference between that. However, this huge stack sitting right next to me right here, these slotted right there. And guess what? These are all asymmetric. These are going to give you different faction abilities. And guess what, folks? There are 18. 18 of them, as long as I don't drop them or hit myself. So that is where your asymmetry is going to come in. Therein lies both the blessing and the curse of this game as a whole, right? That this game, as a competitive, overhead at first driven game in terms of learning curve, is going to be more advantageous for those that know what they're doing in the first place. The explanation to go along with it, the dynamic of the gameplay as a whole, really lends itself to repeated play in that sense. Not that the actions themselves are difficult, not that the rule book is that hard of a learn, right? It's not. The actions are straightforward, but if you don't understand how the pieces are fitting together, that comes through time and experience with a lot of these games, then whether you're battling, negotiating, harvesting, soldiering, upgrading, power meching, or recruiting, along with, mining, whatever else you want to do of the 10 different commands you have, that's a potential trap, pit, or quicksand for any of those in your group with analysis paralysis. Because again, like I mentioned, right, you look at these cards and you have several different things you're doing on them. How do you time them? You have 10 different options. You have 30 different things. You have 4 different asymmetries that you're going along with in terms of the gameplay dynamic of the shifting board. And we haven't even mentioned the fact that as you do certain actions, you have a tremor board that eventually causes a fracture, which you then draw a piece out of a bag that just randomly blows up a part of the planet to not be able to be used or to destroy your troops on in the first place, and whoops, it was your troops, not someone else's. So those are the elements of things. As a divisive standpoint, I can see people either really enjoying because it maximizes the Amerithrash, take that purely chaotic realm and utilizes this to its full extent. And the direct conflict of the Euro mechanistic approach with these cards in the first place, of having perfect control of, I get to do this, and I'm planning out to do this, and I'm planning out to do this, and I've allocated my cards, and I can kind of see what other people are doing as a, slight hidden information of what cards you're burning and what cards you're not. So I maybe have an idea of what you're going to do. I can maybe react there. It's not going to be completely perfect, but I'm going to have a sense of then just sometimes the die rolling and the bag drawing and the fracturing is just going to completely throw you off your game. And how do you enjoy that? The other thing that really stood out to me was the end game, right? And again, I think this is going to be a bit divisive because I think it plays into what this game is going for, but I think it also directly, starkly contrasts our hobby as a whole right now, right? Our hobby as a whole, say what you will, is not based on playing a game repeatedly, right? It's based on, I play something once or twice and then I come back to it, in the near future. Asterisks, right? Near. And so one of the main mechanisms that is going to be divisive in that sense is at the end game. Because if you have the ability to launch your ship, what you can do is, launch your ship. And you get to press the big red launch button. But if you don't have enough people evacuated, if you can't get all of your people evacuated, you have to roll a die, sort of a la Dead of Winter style. And on one of the sides of those dies, you just don't get to launch because you have a conscience that won't let you leave troops behind. The rest will allow you to either leave 1, 2, 3, or 4 troops, or as many troops as you want. So some of it's going to be in your control, and some of it might be also dependent on the die roll, because that doesn't exclude necessarily, I believe, if I'm thinking about this correctly, got that rule correct, the troops that are potentially captured by your opponents. So if they aren't willing to trade them back, could you use that as a stall tactic or a stall technique in order to prevent someone else from smashing the big red button here? And again, I haven't seen that happen, but it's something that my heavy take that, potentially sabotaging for the sake of sabotaging brain likes to think about in terms of these games, right? Because I don't like to kingmake, but I also just like to screw with people in games like this, right? And that's potentially a way that you could screw with people in that sentiment. And now there are variants they put out, just at the end of the rulebook where you can just get rid of that element. But the main reason that element is in there, right, is a conscience mechanic, is that it says, okay, well, those troops that you left behind in the next game that you play aren't going to be available to you in some way, shape, or form. Well, like I said, right, the contrast to our hobby, if you play this game the next time a month later, 2 months later, 6 months later, is that really going to matter? Is that something you want to take into account? Is that something you're going to care about? Or is it not going to have as big an effect lasting-wise in that sense, which then makes me think that in the first place, I wouldn't want to use it as a buffer mechanic at the end game in that way. I guess from this aspect, it stays thematically, mechanically, incorporatingly true of having some of that, just can't deal with it, just got to deal with it, right? Sort of situation. And that is in the form of these discovery cards, where you're going to be randomly drawing from a very large pile of things in one of 3 shades or colors, if you will, depending on how they're going to go, relics, events, and just actions that you're going to be able to do as reactions. And depending on which ones they are going to just potentially have a lot of different things go on, because as you can see, these are all just completely unique. And so if you just pull the wrong one at the wrong time, if you have a hand of them that is just more fitting for your dynamic approach with your asymmetric faction, it may be more appealing to you as a whole. It may just work out more in your favor. Now you have ways of mitigating this. You have ways of mitigating with some of the troops. You have ways of mitigating, even getting back some of the command cards. So it allows you for manipulation but it's not going to be as great a control if you're looking for a heavy Euro game in the first place, or if you're looking for more of just a strategic area control game as well. The other elephant in the room, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, right? This is element upon element upon element upon element upon element that, you know, I'm just going to pile up here for the sake of it, and that's not including a couple other pouches with 2 or 3 of the other factions. And so components are just becoming more and more. And again, I don't say that as a negative, but how do you feel about that in terms of all of those other things? The rules overhead is not as significant as I was expecting, truth be told. But the dynamic, just having all of these components. Nowadays, when I see this on the crowdfunding page of we have 637 cards and we have 4,000 pieces of cardboard, right? I just kind of go, you know, okay, that sounds good in my head, but the practicality of it is where I start to, and I don't know with this one. That's going to have to be a you decision. How frameable is that with your current level of accessibility? So all in all, final thoughts here. Surprisingly, this is a very fun thematic incorporation of everything you want out of an Amerithrash style, take that driven, excessive game. Again, I say that as a compliment because it brings all of those dynamics to you. But I worry that with those dynamics, what makes them the most fun is ease of accessibility. And this is where it clashes, not only from a components, but from a sheer plethora, but also the length of play, essentially, as well. Because the full experience, I feel like, in terms of the dynamics between players, you're not going to have it be that drastically different at the lower player counts. But it's also just not going to be probably as fun. That's going to be a subjective word there, and I'm not sure that's the right word I want to use, but just as engaging of the experience that they're going for in the first place. And therein lies the dilemma. Do you have 2 or 3 hours to play this with these elements? Is it going to be too random for you? Are you okay with 3, 4, 5 different random elements that you're going to be constantly juggling like plates spinning and trying to mitigate there, as opposed to having someone who really truly optimizes the best strategy with these command cards based on the dynamic element of what their opponents are doing on the board in the first place? Because truth be told, if you outplay people this way, you have a better chance at winning, but in no way, shape, or form are you going to be guaranteed just by the fact that, you know what, this is a take that game. Someone might not want you to win. Or, you know what, you just pull the wrong thing, or, you know, even more so, right? Someone else pulls the right thing. It's not that you did anything wrong, it's that they just got luckier. And from a thematic incorporation experience standpoint, I don't have any problem with that. But from a Euro, I'm playing better and I outplayed you standpoint, that's also not going to be the case if that's the type of game you're looking for in addition to this. I really like the cleverness of the command cards. I think that is by far and away the most clever part of this game. And the combination with your asymmetric abilities of each of these faction boards is just a really, really nice touch and solid mechanically. By far and away my favorite part of the game. The battling is unique with the locked-in troops. I wasn't expecting to like that. I wasn't expecting to like the burn one, play one. But again, it's analysis paralysis potentially for anyone that suffers from any sort of action consequence of having all of these available things to you on a round by round, turn by turn basis. And obviously, as you go through the round and you have less cards left later in the round, it's going to be slightly easier, but it doesn't lessen it or lessen the importance of them each and every time, because also the additional commands and actions that you can take here allowing you to sort of mitigate as well if you perhaps didn't choose as wisely as you should have in the first place. But it's not going to be as forgiving either, because again, like I mentioned, surprisingly, probably one of the most surprising aspects is that, again, comparatively to what I expected going into this, the game isn't as long. I'd say, yeah, 30 minutes per player. But, right? 4 players, 5 players, it's going to be talking 2+ hours, maybe 30 to 40 minutes, especially when you start playing. And so that's going to be something you need to be aware of more than anything else. And again, lastly, dice. Are you okay with dice? But I like the way the battle system does it. So you play your battle card, you play it too early, you time it right, you're going to win the battle more often than not. If you don't, you won't. So there you go. Cysmic. Jason, thank you for sending me a copy to talk about. And I'll send it back to you shortly. Check out the crowdfunding campaign page and let me know what you think down below. Right for you, wrong for you, everything else in between. Let me know. Stay classy. Have a great freaking day.